I was called into human resources on a rainy Tuesday morning. The director pushed a thick termination file across the desk and announced that they had irrefutable proof I was working a second job on company time. My own brother stood leaning against the doorframe, smirking, just waiting for me to break down and beg for my livelihood. I did not argue with them. I just smiled, signed the paper, and told them they were absolutely right. I really should focus on just one job. They had no idea what my second job actually was, or that in exactly 48 hours they would be desperately begging me to save their entire company. Before I share the details of this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who severely underestimated your worth. My name is Nina, and I'm 33 years old. For the past 6 years, I worked as a senior risk analyst at Meridian Financial Partners, one of the most ruthless wealth management firms in Chicago. I gave that company my evenings, my weekends, and my peace of mind. I built their compliance protocols from the ground up, catching errors that would have cost the executives millions in federal fines. I thought hard work and flawless performance would be enough to secure my place in the corporate hierarchy. I was incredibly wrong. In corporate America, and especially in my family, loyalty only goes one way. The fluorescent lights in the Human Resources office buzzed with a low, irritating hum that made the tension in the room feel even heavier. I sat in a stiff leather chair across from Monica, the Human Resources director. She was a woman who wore sharp suits and an even sharper expression. She never called anyone into her office for a friendly chat. But it was not Monica who made the air in the room feel so suffocating. It was the presence of the man standing just behind her. My older brother Spencer was 36 years old and had just been appointed as the vice president of risk management. Spencer was the undisputed golden child of our family. Growing up, our parents praised his every mediocre achievement while completely ignoring my actual successes. He was loud, charismatic, and incredibly skilled at taking credit for other people's hard work. That was exactly how he had landed the vice president role just 2 months prior. Monica folded her hands perfectly on top of her pristine desk. She did not offer me a glass of water. She did not offer a gentle opening. She simply dropped a heavy manila folder directly in front of me. The sound of the thick cardboard hitting the wood echoed loudly in the quiet room. "We have irrefutable proof that you have been moonlighting," Nina, Monica said. Her voice was completely devoid of any warmth or professional courtesy. "Operating a secondary business on company time using company resources is a direct violation of your employment contract and a severe breach of corporate ethics. You are terminated, effective immediately." The words hung in the heavy air, sharp and unforgiving. Terminated, effective immediately. I looked down at the folder. Inside were printed logs of my internet activity, showing data transfers and encrypted communications that they could not access but had flagged as highly suspicious. They naturally assumed I was running some small freelance consulting gig on the side. I slowly looked up from the papers and shifted my gaze to Spencer. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed over his expensive tailored suit. A smug, barely contained smirk played on his lips. He was deeply enjoying this. He was actively reveling in watching my corporate career burn to the ground. In that fleeting moment of silence, the entire picture became crystal clear to my mind. This was not about corporate ethics at all. This was about survival, specifically Spencer's survival. I knew for an absolute fact that his department had been hemorrhaging major institutional clients over the past 4 weeks. He had recently bungled 2 major compliance audits because he simply did not understand the complex software systems I had put in place. He was in way over his head, and the senior partners were starting to ask very difficult questions. Spencer desperately needed a scapegoat. He needed a massive distraction to throw to the wolves to cover up his own declining departmental numbers. By firing his own sister for alleged corporate theft, he would look like a ruthless, impartial leader who put the company above his own flesh and blood. It was a brilliant, highly manipulative public relations move. But there was another sickening layer to his betrayal. I knew the salary budget for my senior analyst position was significant. Spencer had been complaining for weeks about wanting to bring in his old college fraternity brother, a guy who had zero risk management experience, but was great at organizing executive golf outings. By terminating me today, Spencer freed up exactly the amount of money he needed to hire his incompetent friend. He was literally sacrificing my livelihood to fund his personal social circle at the office. My heart pounded heavily against my ribs, a steady drumbeat of deep anger and profound disbelief. This was my own flesh and blood. This was the boy I had grown up with, the brother I had covered for when we were rebellious teenagers, the man I had bailed out of countless disastrous financial situations. And here he was, standing tall in a sterile office, watching a human resources director strip away my health insurance and my stable income without a single ounce of visible remorse. He fully expected me to cry. I could see it in the way he tilted his head, waiting eagerly for the tears to fall. He expected me to plead for my job, to beg Monica for a second chance to ask him to intervene on my behalf as my older brother. He wanted to feel incredibly powerful. He wanted to watch me break into pieces. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool oxygen fill my lungs and calm my racing pulse. I reached into my leather purse and pulled out my favorite pen. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or offer a single word of panic defense. I leaned forward, opened the folder to the final page containing the harsh termination agreement, and signed my name in smooth, steady ink. Monica blinked rapidly, clearly taken aback by my absolute lack of resistance. She had been prepared for a massive fight, armed with corporate policies and legal threats. My total serene compliance threw her completely off her practice balance. I closed the folder and slid it back across the mahogany desk. Then I stood up gracefully, smoothing the wrinkles from my professional skirt. I looked directly into Spencer's eyes. The triumphant smirk on his face faltered slightly, suddenly replaced by a brief flicker of genuine confusion. "You are right," I said. My voice was incredibly calm, perfectly level, and entirely devoid of fear. "I really should focus on just one job." Spencer scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes, as he pushed himself off the doorframe. He foolishly thought my words were an admission of pathetic defeat. He thought I was trying to save face, pretending that being suddenly fired was somehow a welcome relief. He thought he had won the war. What Spencer and Monica absolutely failed to realize was that they had not just fired a senior risk analyst, they had just severed their only viable lifeline. They had no idea that my unauthorized side hustle was not some insignificant freelance project. They did not know that the encrypted data transfers they had flagged were actually vital security patches keeping Meridian Financial Partners from completely collapsing under federal scrutiny. They wanted me gone, and I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. But I knew something they did not. I knew that the ticking time bomb sitting in their server room had just been activated, and I was the only person on Earth holding the deactivation code. I turned my back on them and walked confidently out of the office, completely ready to face whatever came next. The game had just begun. The heavy glass doors of the Human Resources Department clicked shut behind me. Two security guards in dark gray uniforms fell into step on either side of my shoulders. They were standard procedure for any immediate termination at Meridian Financial Partners, meant to intimidate the fired employee and ensure they did not steal any sensitive physical documents on their way out of the building. I knew both of the guards by name. I had helped one of them, a quiet man named David, navigate a complicated health insurance claim just 3 months ago. He refused to meet my eyes now, staring straight ahead as we walked down the long carpeted corridor toward the executive elevators. I did not hold his silence against him. He was just doing his job, And in a corporate environment as ruthless as this one, self-preservation always came first. The elevator ride down to the ground floor was agonizingly slow. The soft instrumental music playing from the hidden speakers felt almost mocking in its tranquility. I watched the digital floor numbers count down from the 42nd floor, feeling a strange sense of detachment. My pulse remained perfectly steady. I adjusted the strap of my leather purse on my shoulder and kept my chin raised. When the polished metal doors finally slid open to reveal the expansive main lobby, a few junior analysts paused by the reception desk to watch my escorted exit. Whispers rippled through the open space. In a matter of hours, the internal company chat channels would be flooded with wild rumors about my sudden departure. I walked through the revolving doors and stepped out into the damp Chicago morning. The rain had intensified, washing the gray sidewalks and leaving a metallic scent in the chilly air. I took a deep breath, letting the cold moisture settle into my lungs. The security guards stopped at the edge of the company property line, nodding awkwardly before turning back inside to the warmth of the grand corporate lobby. I pulled my coat tighter around my waist and began the short walk across the sprawling executive parking lot. My modest sedan was parked near the back, surrounded by the sleek imported sports cars and luxury utility vehicles favored by the senior partners. The rain pattered against my umbrella, creating a rhythmic drumming sound that matched my steady footsteps. I was just reaching for my car keys when I heard the sharp, urgent sound of leather dress shoes splashing through the shallow puddles behind me. I did not need to turn around to know exactly who was aggressively closing the distance between us. Spencer had not been satisfied with merely watching me sign the termination paperwork. He needed the final, visceral thrill of physically throwing me off his territory. I unlocked my car doors with a soft beep and slowly turned around. Spencer was practically jogging across the wet asphalt, ignoring the rain that was currently ruining his perfectly styled hair and expensive silk tie. In his hands, he carried a flimsy brown cardboard box filled with the meager personal belongings I had kept on my desk. He reached my car, breathing heavily, his face flushed with a mixture of exertion and residual adrenaline from his orchestrated power play. He did not gently hand the box over. Instead, he shoved it forcefully onto the wet hood of my sedan. The cardboard scraped loudly against the paint, and the impact sent a few loose pens and a small notebook tumbling over the side and into a muddy puddle near my front tire. I looked at the spilled items, then calmly shifted my gaze back to his face. He had completely dropped his polished corporate facade. The polite, concerned brother act he had put on for the human resources director was gone, replaced by the ugly, arrogant sneer I had known since childhood. "Do not expect Mom and Dad to bail you out this time, Nina," he sneered, his voice loud enough to echo across the empty parking spaces. "You are completely on your own. You have always been an absolute embarrassment to this family name. And today, you finally proved it to the entire executive board. You could not even handle a simple mid-level analyst job without slacking off and breaking company policy." I stood perfectly still, letting his cruel words wash over me like the cold rain. He desperately wanted me to argue. He wanted me to shout to defend my work ethic, to beg for his sympathy. When I remained silent, his frustration visibly mounted. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use his physical height to intimidate me. By the way he said, his tone shifting from insulting to purely transactional. "I need the encryption passwords for your legacy audit databases. The system locked me out when Human Resources deactivated your employee profile 10 minutes ago. Write them down right now and leave them with me, or I swear I will have the corporate legal team sue you for theft of company property and deliberate sabotage." I looked at him, truly registering the sheer depth of his incompetence. He had orchestrated my firing without securing the basic administrative transition protocols. He had blindly assumed he could just bully me into handing over the keys to the kingdom in the parking lot. The legacy audit databases contained 5 years of historical compliance data, including the glaring, catastrophic risk assessment failures he had personally buried over the last 2 months. He needed those files to hide his tracks before the federal regulators arrived for their scheduled preliminary review next week. My reaction was not one of panic or submission. I let out a soft, genuine laugh that cut sharply through the sound of the falling rain. Spencer recoiled slightly, clearly caught off guard by my amusement. "Sue me," I repeated, shaking my head slowly. "Just like you threatened to sue me when I refused to empty my personal savings account to cover your massive offshore gambling debts 3 years ago." His face instantly drained of color. His jaw tightened so hard I could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. He had buried that gambling disaster deep, relying on my silence to maintain his pristine image with our parents. I stepped around him, picking up the damp cardboard box from the hood of my car and placing it carefully onto the passenger seat. I opened the driver door and turned back to face him one last time. "You really should read the vendor contracts before you fire the only person managing them, Spencer," I said, my voice completely stripped of any familial warmth. "Those legacy databases do not belong to Meridian Financial Partners anymore. They were migrated to a secure third-party vendor network last Friday as part of the new federal compliance mandate. You have zero administrative authority to access them without my direct authorization, and I no longer work here. Good luck cracking a military-grade firewall before the federal review begins Thursday morning." I slid into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly cutting off the sound of his furious, sputtering response. Through the rain-slicked window, I watched his face contort with a sudden, dawning panic. He slammed his hand against the wet trunk of my car as I started the engine, but I did not look back again. I shifted the gears smoothly, pulling out of the parking space and leaving him standing completely alone in the freezing downpour. I drove for several long blocks, allowing the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers to clear my thoughts. The harsh reality of his betrayal was painful, yet incredibly liberating. For my entire life, I had dutifully played the role of the quiet, dependable sister who fixed his constant mistakes. I had sacrificed my own peace of mind to protect his fragile ego and maintain the illusion of family harmony. But today, that incredibly destructive cycle was permanently and finally broken. I took one very slow, deep breath, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of my parents' unrealistic expectations completely lift off my weary shoulders. I was no longer their scapegoat, and I was finally entirely free. I drove for another 10 minutes until the towering glass structures of the financial district gave way to the quieter, tree-lined streets of the surrounding neighborhoods. The rain continued to fall in steady, rhythmic sheets against my windshield, creating a comforting barrier between myself and the corporate world I had just left behind. I pulled my sedan into a vacant parking space along a brick-paved avenue, shifted the gear into park, and turned off the engine. The sudden silence inside the cabin was profound. I sat there for a long moment, my hands resting lightly on the leather steering wheel, listening to the gentle drumming of the rain. My phone buzzed persistently in the center console. I did not need to look at the screen to know it was Spencer. He was likely panicking in the lobby right now, realizing the catastrophic mistake he had just made by firing the only person who understood the deeply flawed architecture of his risk management department. I reached over and flipped the phone face down. Let him panic. I turned my attention to the passenger seat, bypassing the sad cardboard box of my desk supplies instead. I reached for my heavy, matte black leather briefcase tucked securely in the footwell. I placed the briefcase on my lap and carefully unzipped the main compartment. I pulled out my personal laptop. It was not a standard company-issued machine with monitored software and restricted access. It was a custom-built, military-grade piece of hardware that I had assembled myself, wrapped in a reinforced carbon fiber casing. It cost more than Spencer made in an entire quarter, and it was worth every single penny. I opened the lid and waited for the biometric authentication sequence to initiate. I pressed my thumb against the small, glowing sensor pad below the keyboard. A soft green light swept across my fingerprint, verifying the complex ridges and whorls. Instantly, the high-definition camera mounted at the top of the screen blinked to life, scanning my facial geometry to complete the two-factor security protocol. The screen flared a brilliant, crisp white, bypassing a standard commercial desktop interface entirely. It booted directly into a highly secured, compartmentalized operating system that left absolutely no digital footprint. Welcome to Apex Sentinel Solutions. The greeting materialized across the dark screen in elegant, minimalist text. This was the massive secret that my family would have relentlessly mocked if they had known about it during its early infancy. This was the secondary business Monica had so smugly referenced during my termination meeting, dismissing it as some trivial side hobby that was stealing company time. 4 years ago, while my parents were busy funding the lavish life of my older brother and looking the other way when he made terrible financial choices, I was spending every evening and weekend writing thousands of lines of complex code. Working at Meridian Financial Partners had given me a front-row seat to the massive vulnerabilities within the corporate sector. I saw firsthand how mid-level executives were constantly exposing their wealth management firms to catastrophic federal fines due to sheer incompetence and a fundamental misunderstanding of modern data security. They relied on outdated, easily compromised legacy systems because they were too arrogant to adapt. So I decided to build an artificial intelligence-driven cybersecurity and compliance firm to fix the exact problems they were ignoring. I registered the limited liability company under a completely blind trust. I operated the entire business through anonymous proxy servers and retained a formidable team of legal representatives who were strictly bound by the absolute strictest non-disclosure agreements legally possible. To the outside corporate world, the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Sentinel Solutions was a brilliant, reclusive tech visionary who refused to do press interviews or public appearances. To my parents and my brother, I was just Nina, the ungrateful daughter who wasted her time staring at a computer screen instead of unconditionally supporting the glorious rise of her brother to the corporate top. I opened my primary command dashboard. The interface was a breathtakingly complex array of global data streams, active client-server monitors, and automated security protocols. It was a beautiful, living digital ecosystem that I had painstakingly crafted with my own 2 hands. My company currently managed the elite compliance infrastructure for 9 major international financial firms, safeguarding billions of dollars in daily transactions. I watched the green status indicators pulsing steadily across the screen, confirming that my proprietary artificial intelligence was actively hunting and neutralizing security threats across multiple continents. But I was not logging in to check on my global clients today. I navigated away from the main monitoring hub and opened my encrypted corporate communication portal. This highly secure inbox was exclusively reserved for high-level executive inquiries and acquisition offers. Over the past 6 months, Apex Sentinel Solutions had become the most coveted independent cybersecurity firm in the country. Major tech conglomerates and massive financial institutions had been circling my anonymous company like hungry sharks, desperate to acquire the technology that was making their own security departments look entirely obsolete. As soon as the inbox loaded, a priority notification chimed softly through my laptop speakers. The alert flashed red, indicating a message flagged with the highest possible level of urgency. I clicked the icon bringing the communication to the center of my crisp screen. I looked at the return address and felt a sharp, electric jolt of pure satisfaction rush through my veins. The email did not come from some mid-level manager or a desperate human resources director. It came directly from the personal, highly secured account of the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Financial Partners. I leaned back against the driver's seat, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face as I began to read the frantic message. Dear Founder, I am writing to you under circumstances of extreme corporate urgency. Meridian Financial Partners is currently experiencing severe infrastructure failures that will immediately threaten our standing in an incoming preliminary review by the Securities and Exchange Commission. We recognize the unparalleled superiority of your software architecture and your proven success in mitigating federal compliance risks. We are desperate to expedite the $50 million acquisition of Apex Sentinel Solutions. We are prepared to completely bypass our standard vendor vetting process and offer significant immediate financial concessions to secure your software today. Please name your price. Our entire operation depends on integrating your technology before the federal reviewers arrive. I read the desperate pleading words a second time, letting the sheer, incredibly delicious irony of the situation settle deep into my bones. Name your price. The top executive of the very company that had just unceremoniously fired me for a breach of contract was now literally begging my anonymous alias to save them from federal ruin. They were eagerly offering $50 million to a company they did not realize was entirely owned by the woman they had just thrown out into the rainy parking lot. Spencer had proudly handed the executives a convenient scapegoat to mask his own failures, but in doing so, he had accidentally triggered the absolute destruction of his own department. He had no idea that the silent safety net he had heavily relied on for the past 6 years was actually his sister, working a second job in the shadows to prevent his constant compliance violations from bringing down the firm. He had just confidently fired his only protection against federal indictment. I did not type a reply to the email. I simply sat there, in the quiet comfort of my car, listening to the rain and watching the cursor blink steadily on the screen. Let them sweat. Let the sheer panic set in as their internal network warnings multiplied across their failing servers. Desperation was a fantastic, highly effective negotiation tactic, and I wanted Meridian Financial Partners to be utterly frantic by the time I finally decided to respond to their generous offer. I closed the encrypted inbox and shut the laptop, the screen going black instantly. I placed the machine carefully back into my briefcase and zipped the leather compartment closed. I was no longer an undervalued risk analyst. I closed the encrypted inbox and let the laptop rest open on my knees for several seconds. Meridian's message remained in my mind. Name your price. 4 hours earlier, Monica had spoken to me as if I were an employee caught stealing printer paper. Now, the most powerful people in that same building were offering $50 million for access to the company they believed belonged to a faceless stranger. The contrast should have felt unreal. Instead, it felt like the cleanest confirmation I had ever received that leaving Meridian was not a loss. It was an extraction from a system that had survived by hiding my value. My phone vibrated against the center console. The screen showed a message from my mother, Patricia. She did not ask whether I was safe, whether I needed help, or whether Spencer had treated me fairly. Her text carried the brisk authority of a summons. Family dinner tonight at Valmont Steakhouse, 7 sharp. Do not be late. We have important things to discuss regarding your behavior today. I read it twice, not because the meaning was unclear, but because the complete absence of concern was almost impressive. Spencer had obviously called our parents before the security guards had escorted me through the lobby. He would have described himself as the brave executive forced to discipline an unstable relative. He would have omitted the failing audits, the inaccessible databases, and his demand that I surrender credentials after my termination. Patricia and Richard would not have asked for evidence. They never did when Spencer offered them a version of events that preserved him as the family hero. A second message appeared before I responded. Your father reserved the private booth. Spencer has had a very difficult day. Do not make this worse. I almost laughed. Spencer had fired me, threatened me in a parking lot, and tried to force me to help conceal his negligence, yet he was the one who needed emotional protection. The pattern was so familiar that I could predict the entire dinner. Richard would praise Spencer for making a difficult leadership decision. Patricia would call my work a hobby. They would demand an apology and the database keys. If I resisted, they would accuse me of jealousy, selfishness, and disloyalty. The only difference was that this time, I was not walking into the room hoping to be understood. I was walking in with knowledge they did not possess. I typed a simple reply. I will be there at 7. Then I powered down the laptop, returned it to the reinforced briefcase, and drove home. My apartment occupied the upper floor of a converted warehouse overlooking the Chicago River. My family believed I rented a cramped studio because I had never corrected the assumption. Their contempt had given me privacy, and privacy had allowed Apex Sentinel to grow without Spencer trying to attach his name to it. I showered, changed into a black tailored dress and a charcoal coat, and reviewed the alerts from Meridian one final time before leaving. The red indicators had multiplied. 3 institutional clients had requested emergency risk briefings. Meridian's internal technology team had opened a priority incident ticket, but no one had identified the source of the collapse. Spencer had already sent 2 messages to the anonymous Apex inbox, each more urgent than the last. I left them unanswered. Valmont Steakhouse occupied the ground floor of a limestone building in the financial district. It was the kind of restaurant Richard selected when he wanted strangers to notice him. Dark wood panels, brass lamps, white tablecloths, and a wine list designed to turn insecurity into a 4-figure bill. When I arrived, the hostess led me toward a curved booth at the rear of the dining room. I heard Patricia's laughter before I saw the table. My parents and Spencer were already raising crystal glasses. A bottle of wine sat in a silver cooler beside them, and a second, unopened bottle waited on the service stand. Spencer had changed out of the rain-spotted suit he wore in the parking lot and into a navy jacket with a silk pocket square. He looked restored, polished, and entirely convinced that the family tribunal would return me to his control. Richard lifted his glass higher when I approached. "To Spencer," he announced, loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. "A real leader who had the courage to protect Meridian from internal liabilities even when the decision involved family." Patricia touched her glass to his. "And to the bold restructuring that will finally let his department reach its potential." Spencer accepted the praise with a modest smile so carefully performed that it would have been convincing to anyone who had not watched him throw a cardboard box onto a wet car hood that morning. No one stood to greet me. No one asked how I was doing. Patricia merely looked at her watch. "You are 3 minutes late," she said. "Traffic," I replied, sliding into the empty side of the booth. A waiter appeared with a menu, but Richard waved him away. "We ordered for you. You always take too long deciding." Of course they had. Even the meal placed in front of me had been chosen without my consent. I removed my coat, folded it beside me, and surveyed the table. Spencer's phone lay face down near his elbow. Richard's phone was face up, beside his wineglass. Patricia had arranged herself between them, like the presiding judge of a private court. "Before dinner arrives," she began, "we need to address what happened at Meridian. Spencer told us everything." I lifted my water glass. "Everything enough," Richard said. "He made a painful but necessary executive decision. Instead of accepting responsibility, you embarrassed him in the parking lot and withheld company property." Spencer leaned back, allowing our parents to open the attack for him. "I tried to handle it privately," he said. "You chose to be difficult." I took a slow sip of water. Beyond the booth, the restaurant continued with its ordinary rhythm. Cutlery touching porcelain, low conversation, A burst of laughter near the bar. My family had selected a public room because they believed I would protect their image by surrendering quietly. They did not understand that I no longer carried responsibility for their image. Patricia's mouth tightened when I did not apologize. Spencer says you were neglecting your real work for some little computer business. It is pathetic, Nina. You are 33 years old. When are you going to stop playing around and support your brother's vision? I looked across the table at the three people who believed they had summoned an unemployed, frightened daughter. They had no idea that Meridian's board was already begging my company for rescue, or that every minute they spent humiliating me made that rescue less likely. I placed the water glass down with deliberate care and waited for them to continue. I looked across the table at my mother, watching the candlelight reflect off her heavy gold jewelry. The steakhouse was loud, filled with the steady hum of corporate dinners, clinking wine glasses, and the scent of seared beef. Yet Patricia's harsh words cut through the ambient noise with absolute precision. She stared at me with profound disappointment, fully expecting me to shrink back into my chair, apologize for my supposed failures, and beg for her forgiveness. I did not shrink. I picked up my silver fork, pierced a piece of asparagus, and took a slow, deliberate bite. Spencer was seated right next to her, swirling the last drops of a martini in his glass. He had clearly spent the hours since my termination spinning an elaborate, victimized narrative for our parents. He must have rushed straight to their house, painting a picture of a difficult but necessary executive decision. He had undoubtedly told them that I was a massive liability to his newly acquired department, and that he had heroically stepped in to protect the integrity of Meridian Financial Partners. And of course they had swallowed every single lie, without requesting a shred of proof. They always did. My father, Richard, set his steak knife down on his plate. He wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. He possessed the exact same arrogant posture as my brother, a physical trait Spencer had mimicked and perfected over 3 decades. "Your mother is absolutely right, Nina," my father said, his voice dropping into that condescending, authoritative tone he reserved exclusively for me. "Spencer was put in a very difficult position today. You forced his hand. A vice president cannot have junior staff members undermining his authority, especially not a relative. It looks terrible to the senior partners. He did what any competent corporate leader would do. He protected the company." Protected the company, I repeated quietly, letting the words hang in the air between us. "Is that what he told you he was doing?" Spencer shifted uncomfortably in his leather booth. His eyes darted nervously toward my father, then to me. He cleared his throat loudly, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "I did what had to be done," Nina Spencer stated, puffing out his chest. "And honestly, your behavior in the parking lot this afternoon was completely unacceptable. Refusing to hand over the departmental transition materials is incredibly immature. We brought you here tonight because Mom and Dad agree that you owe me a formal apology. Furthermore, you need to write down the encryption passwords for the legacy audit databases right now." My mother nodded, enthusiastically reaching out to pat Spencer on the arm. "Your brother is being very generous by not involving the corporate legal team, Nina. You should be thanking him for handling this internally. Now stop being so stubborn and uncooperative. Give him whatever computer passwords he needs so he can properly restructure his department. You have already caused enough trouble for him this month." I looked at the three of them sitting shoulder to shoulder on the opposite side of the table, a unified wall of toxic family dynamics. They genuinely believed they held all the power. They thought they could bully me in a crowded restaurant using their combined disapproval to force me into handing over the keys to the legacy system. They had no idea that the legacy system was currently locked behind a military-grade firewall, and that without those passwords, Spencer was completely unable to hide the massive compliance violations he had committed over the past 60 days. He did not want to restructure his department. He wanted to cover up his own tracks before the federal review team arrived, and he was using our parents to pressure me into facilitating his cover-up. I set my water glass down. The ice cubes clinked softly against the crystal. "I cannot give you those passwords, Spencer," I said, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with him. My father slammed his hand down on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "Nina, stop this nonsense right now," he demanded, his voice rising in volume. "Do not play games with your brother's career. You will give him the access codes he needs, and you will do it before we leave this restaurant." I shook my head slowly, feeling a deep sense of power radiating through my chest. "It is not a game, Dad," I replied evenly. "I do not have the legal authority to grant him access, as I already explained to Spencer in the parking lot. Those legacy audit databases were migrated to a secure, third-party vendor last week due to new federal regulations. Only active, authorized compliance personnel can request access. Since Spencer and his human resources director officially terminated my employment and deactivated my corporate credentials this morning, I am permanently locked out. I could not give him the passwords even if I wanted to." Spencer's face went completely pale in the dim lighting of the steakhouse. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, finally realizing that I was not bluffing. He had assumed I was just withholding the information out of spite. He had not comprehended the sheer technical reality of his own foolish actions. By firing me, he had legally and digitally severed his only point of access to the very files he desperately needed to manipulate. My mother, oblivious to the sudden terror washing over her golden child's face, sighed loudly and rolled her eyes. "You always have to make things so incredibly difficult," she complained, picking up her wine glass. "This is exactly why you have never succeeded in a real corporate environment, Nina. You lack the basic ability to be a team player. You spend all your time huddled over your laptop, tinkering with that pathetic little side business of yours, while your brother is out here making massive executive decisions and carrying the family name." I watched my mother take a long sip of her expensive red wine. Her blatant dismissal of my work, her casual cruelty, and her unwavering devotion to a son who was actively deceiving her did not hurt me anymore. It simply validated every single boundary I had quietly built over the past 4 years. "You are 33 years old," my father added, pointing his steak knife in my direction for emphasis. "It is time to grow up. You have no job, no prospects, and clearly no sense of loyalty to the people who raised you. We brought you to this dinner hoping you would show some remorse, maybe ask Spencer for a good reference or a small severance package, but you are just sitting there, being completely defiant. You need to figure out what you are going to do with your life, Nina, because we are not going to support a grown woman who refuses to apply herself." I looked down at my plate, slicing a small piece of steak. The irony was so rich and thick I could practically taste it. They were fiercely lecturing the founder of a company worth $50 million about work ethic and financial independence. They were desperately trying to protect a man who was 48 hours away from causing a catastrophic corporate meltdown. They were demanding loyalty from the very person they had happily sacrificed earlier that morning. Spencer shifted again, running a trembling hand through his hair. He was no longer paying attention to my parents' relentless berating. His eyes were darting around the restaurant, his mind visibly racing as he tried to figure out how he was going to survive the incoming federal audit without my administrative keys. He was suffocating in his own trap, and we were only a few hours into the countdown. I leaned back against the plush leather booth, folding my hands in my lap. I let the silence stretch between us, allowing her cruel words to hang suspended in the air. I did not need to defend my reality to them. The truth was already in motion, speeding toward them like a freight train in the dark. I was merely sitting at the table patiently, waiting for the inevitable impact. The heavy silence that had settled over our side of the booth was finally broken by the crisp, professional voice of our waiter. He appeared at the edge of the table, expertly balancing a small silver tray, holding our polished leather checkbook. He offered a polite, practiced smile, thanking us for dining at the establishment, before placing the dark leather folder precisely in the center of the mahogany table. The ambient noise of the bustling steakhouse seemed to rush back into my ears as the waiter turned and disappeared into the sea of crowded tables. For a brief moment, nobody moved. The three of them stared at the black folder as if waiting for a specific cue. My father, Richard, was the first to break the tableau. He reached out with a slow, deliberate motion and pulled the leather folder toward his chest. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the itemized receipt. I knew exactly what was on that list. Spencer had ordered 2 bottles of an incredibly expensive imported red wine, insisting that his promotion and subsequent restructuring of the risk management department demanded a premium celebration. My mother had requested the most lavish seafood appetizers on the menu, and my father had ordered a bone-in ribeye that cost more than my first weekly paycheck after college. The total sum was undoubtedly staggering. Richard did not reach for his wallet. He did not pull out his prestigious corporate credit card. Instead, he placed his large hand flat against the closed leather folder and slid it directly across the polished wood. The folder came to a smooth stop right in front of my water glass. "You are paying tonight, Nina," my father stated. His voice was not a request. It was an absolute, unyielding command. "Consider it a late penalty for embarrassing Spencer in the parking lot today. You need to learn that your actions have severe consequences. Since you clearly have so much free time on your hands to play around with your little side projects, you can take care of the family dinner." Spencer leaned back in the booth, crossing his arms over his chest with a deeply satisfied smirk. He looked like a man who had just won a grueling marathon without having to run a single step. My mother, Patricia, simply picked up her wine glass, her face a mask of serene entitlement. They genuinely believed this was the ultimate punishment. They thought sticking an unemployed woman with a massive restaurant bill would completely break my spirit, forcing me to drain whatever pathetic savings they assumed I had left. They wanted me to feel the sharp, humiliating sting of financial desperation. They had absolutely no idea that I could buy the entire restaurant, including the building it sat in, without making a dent in my corporate holdings. I did not argue. I did not act shocked, and I certainly did not plead with them to split the cost. I maintained my perfectly calm demeanor, letting a faint, pleasant smile touch my lips. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and picked up my leather purse. I unzipped the main compartment, my fingers brushing past the encrypted laptop that held the fate of their entire corporate existence. I reached for my wallet, fully intending to drop my card into the folder and walk out of their lives forever. Just as my fingers closed around the smooth leather of my wallet, my personal cell phone vibrated violently at the bottom of my purse. It was not a standard gentle buzz, indicating a text message or a social media notification. It was a sharp, aggressive, continuous pulse. I recognized the specific vibration pattern immediately. It was the emergency override alert from my primary banking application. I paused, my brow furrowing just a fraction. I pulled the phone out of my purse and brought it up to the edge of the table, keeping the screen angled away from my family. I pressed my thumb against the biometric sensor. The device unlocked instantly, and the screen flared to life. My breathing stopped. The entire interface of my banking application was washed in a brilliant, urgent red. A massive warning banner completely dominated the display. "Critical fraud alert. Please verify immediate origination of commercial funds." I stared at the bold white text, my mind racing through my immediate financial architecture. My credit was pristine, carefully guarded behind multiple layers of institutional security. I clicked the secure link to open the detailed transaction report, my eyes scanning the raw data as it populated on the screen. A commercial business loan had just been approved and fully drawn. The amount listed was staggering: $300,000. I felt a sudden, icy chill radiate down my spine, spreading rapidly through my chest and pooling in my stomach. $300,000 had just been legally attached to my name. I scrolled down my eyes rapidly, dissecting the origination details. The loan had been secured using my exact social security number, my verified birth date, and my historical residential data. The lender was a prominent national bank, one known for expedited corporate lending. But the most damning piece of information was the routing destination. The massive sum of money had not been transferred into any of my secure accounts. It had been instantly routed to an external joint account. I recognized the last 4 digits of that routing number. It was a legacy account, an old joint financial account my parents had set up for me when I was a teenager, heading off to my first year of college. I had stopped using it over a decade ago, assuming it had been closed and purged from the system. But Richard and Patricia had remained on the account as primary co-signers. The heavy, suffocating puzzle pieces began to snap together with terrifying, violent clarity. Spencer had not just been failing at his job. He had not just been hiding routine compliance errors. A vice president of risk management does not need $300,000 in immediate liquid cash unless they are trying to cover up something deeply, criminally illegal. Spencer had been embezzling money from Meridian Financial Partners. He had created a massive gaping hole in the company ledgers, and with the federal reviewers arriving on Monday, he was entirely out of time. His own credit was undoubtedly destroyed from his offshore gambling addictions. He could not secure a commercial loan to save his own life, so he had gone to our parents. He had gone to Richard, and Patricia spun a tragic, desperate story and begged them to save his career. And my parents, who had spent their entire lives shielding their golden boy from the consequences of his own disastrous actions, had willingly crossed the line into federal crime. They had used the personal identifying information they held from my childhood. They had weaponized my pristine credit score, forged my digital signature, and taken out a massive, fraudulent loan to bail out their favorite child. They had not just fired me this morning. They had financially ruined me to fund my brother's corporate crimes. The sheer, absolute magnitude of their betrayal settled over me like a suffocating blanket of lead. They were sitting right across the table from me, eating expensive steaks and sipping imported wine, casually demanding that I pay a restaurant bill, all while knowing they had just stolen $300,000 in my name. They had orchestrated this entire dinner, not just to humiliate me, but to keep me distracted while the funds cleared the external routing process. I looked up from the glowing red screen of my phone. The restaurant around me seemed to fade into a dull, muted background blur. The clinking of glasses, the soft jazz music, the low hum of conversation, all vanished. There were only the 3 of them sitting shoulder to shoulder in the leather booth, staring back at me with varying expressions of impatient entitlement. This was the moment everything changed completely. I was ready for absolute, total destruction. I took a slow, deeply calming breath. My sweet revenge was beginning right now. I would never let them disrespect me ever again. I let my eyes drift from the glowing red screen of my own device to the center of the dining table. My father had placed his expensive smartphone face up right next to his half-empty wine glass. He always did that, a subtle power move to show everyone that his business was more important than the company he was keeping. At that exact moment, the sleek screen of his phone illuminated the dim space between us. A push notification slid smoothly across his lock screen. I did not need to lean forward or strain my eyes to read the bold white text. The message was a direct confirmation from the exact same national bank that had just issued my critical fraud alert. The notification proudly announced that a commercial wire transfer of $300,000 had been successfully completed and deposited into the legacy joint account. My father glanced down at the screen. A look of profound, undeniable relief washed over his aging features. He let out a long, slow breath, subtly relaxing his broad shoulders against the leather booth. He actually reached out and patted my mother gently on the knee, a silent, triumphant signal between co-conspirators that their massive financial crime had just cleared the final institutional hurdle. They had done it. They had successfully stolen my identity to bail out their golden child, and they were sitting across from me, basking in the warm glow of their own perceived brilliance. I looked at Spencer. He was still watching me with that arrogant, expectant smirk, eagerly waiting for me to hand over my credit card to pay for his lavish celebration. The absolute audacity of the situation was almost difficult to comprehend. Spencer was a vice president of risk management who had just embezzled a catastrophic amount of money from his own employer. He had ruined his personal credit years ago with his overseas gambling addictions, leaving him completely unable to secure a legitimate loan to cover his corporate tracks. So he had run to our parents, terrified of the federal review team scheduled to arrive Thursday morning. And my parents, who had spent my entire life telling me I was a foolish, lazy disappointment, had instantly agreed to commit a severe federal felony to save him. They had weaponized my pristine credit score. They had leveraged my clean financial history, forged my digital signature as a hidden guarantor, and bypassed the standard underwriting process because my data practically guaranteed immediate approval. They had orchestrated this entire expensive dinner just to keep me distracted and out of the house while the final banking approvals went through the automated system. They wanted me sitting right in front of them, docile and submissive, while they robbed me of my financial future. The sheer, unadulterated evil of their plan did not make me want to cry. It did not make me want to scream or throw my glass across the crowded restaurant. It made me feel an intense, overwhelming sense of calm clarity. They had finally handed me the exact ammunition I needed to sever these toxic ties permanently. I slowly zipped my purse closed. I did not pull out my debit card. I did not pull out my corporate expense card. Instead, I reached into the small side pocket of my wallet and extracted a crisp $10 bill and a $5 bill. I held the paper currency in my right hand, feeling the textured surface against my fingertips. "Nina!" My mother snapped, her voice laced with sudden, sharp irritation. "What exactly are you doing? Your brother is waiting. Put your credit card in the folder and stop making a scene. People are starting to look at our table." I ignored her completely. I extended my arm and placed the exact sum of $15 deliberately on top of the black leather checkbook. I smoothed the bills flat with my index finger, making sure they sat perfectly centered on the polished mahogany table. "That is for my sparkling water," I said. My voice was incredibly low, perfectly steady, and devoid of any familial warmth. "I am not paying for your imported wine, your excessive seafood appetizers, or your celebratory steaks. I am certainly not paying a late penalty for a parking lot disagreement, and I am absolutely not funding a celebration dedicated to my own termination." My father stared at the $15 as if I had just placed a live explosive on the table. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He opened his mouth to shout at me to deliver one of his trademark authoritarian lectures about respect and family duty. Before he could form a single word, I raised my hand and pointed directly at his smartphone. "You really should turn off your push notifications, Dad," I stated clearly, keeping my eyes locked on his face. "Especially when you are actively committing federal lending fraud across the dinner table from your victim." The air in our booth vanished. The ambient noise of the busy steakhouse seemed to fade into a distant, meaningless hum. My father froze, his mouth hanging slightly open. His eyes darted to his phone screen, which had just gone dark, and then snapped back to me. The color drained from his flushed cheeks with terrifying speed, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. My mother let out a sharp, theatrical gasp, bringing her hand up to cover her mouth. She looked at my father in sheer panic, her wide eyes silently pleading for him to fix the situation. Spencer practically choked on his martini. He slammed his glass down, coughing and sputtering as the alcohol caught in his throat. "What are you talking about?" he managed to wheeze out, his voice high-pitched and entirely stripped of its previous arrogance. "You are insane, Nina. You are just making up crazy accusations because you are bitter about losing your job today." I turned my gaze to my brother, letting a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. "Am I making it up, Spencer?" I asked smoothly, "because my primary banking application just sent me a critical fraud alert. It seems a commercial business loan was just approved and fully drawn using my exact social security number and my verified birth date as a hidden guarantor." I paused, letting the devastating reality of my words sink into their panicked minds. "And it is incredibly fascinating," I continued, "that the massive sum of $300,000 was instantly routed to the legacy joint account Mom and Dad set up for me when I was 18 years old. The same account they are still listed on as primary co-signers. The same account that just sent a successful wire transfer confirmation to Dad's phone 2 minutes ago." My father tried to speak, his voice reduced to a hoarse, desperate whisper. "Nina, please, you do not understand the situation. We can explain everything. It is just a temporary arrangement. We were going to tell you about it tomorrow morning." A temporary arrangement to cover up the $300,000 Spencer embezzled from Meridian Financial Partners. I asked, cutting through his pathetic lies with surgical precision. "Because we both know Spencer's credit is completely destroyed from his offshore gambling habits. We both know he could not secure a legitimate commercial loan to save his own life. You stole my identity to bail out a corporate criminal because the federal review team is arriving Thursday morning." My mother reached across the table, her manicured fingers trembling as she tried to grab my hand. "Nina, sweetheart, you have to listen to us. Your brother was in terrible trouble. We had no other choice. We are your family. We will pay the money back, we promise. Just give us some time to sort this out." I pulled my hand back, deeply disgusted by her sudden touch and blatant manipulation. "You had a choice," I said coldly. "You chose to ruin my financial future to protect his fragile ego." I grabbed my winter coat and stood up, looking down at the three of them. "I am not paying for your celebration," I stated, "and I am reporting this massive, fraudulent business loan tomorrow morning." I let my words hang in the chilly evening air. The bustling sounds of downtown traffic seemed to perfectly frame the absolute silence coming from my family. Spencer took a physical step backward. His arrogant posture deflated for just a fraction of a second before his fragile ego forced him to rebuild his defensive wall. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that sounded incredibly forced. "You are completely delusional, Nina," he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You just lost a mid-level analyst position, and now you are standing on a public sidewalk threatening a corporate vice president. You have absolutely zero power here. You are just throwing a pathetic temper tantrum because you are jealous of my success." My father stepped forward, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me the way he had done throughout my entire childhood. He pointed a thick finger at my chest. "You will stop this foolishness right now," he commanded, his voice rumbling with suppressed anger. "You are going to get back inside that restaurant, sit down at our table, and figure out a payment plan to help your brother through this temporary financial hurdle. You will not report anything to anyone. We are your parents, and we are telling you to drop this ridiculous vendetta." I looked at my father, feeling a profound sense of pity for his willful ignorance. "I am not going back inside, Dad," I stated smoothly, "and I am certainly not funding a criminal cover-up." I turned my attention back to Spencer, who was nervously adjusting the collar of his expensive coat. "Enjoy your weekend, Spencer," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, "because come Monday morning, the Federal Review Team is going to ask you very specific questions about the data masking protocols on the international accounts. And since you just fired the only person who actually knows how to run those patches, I suggest you spend your Sunday finding a very good defense attorney." I did not wait for his response. I turned on my heel and walked purposefully down the paved sidewalk toward where I had parked my sedan. I could hear my mother calling my name, her voice rising in a panicked, high-pitched wail. But I did not slow my pace. I unlocked my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and locked it immediately. Through the driver's side window, I watched my family standing together under the glowing neon sign of the steakhouse. They looked small, frantic, and entirely pathetic. I started the engine and merged smoothly into the steady flow of downtown traffic, leaving them behind in the cold. The drive back to my apartment was remarkably peaceful. I had fully expected a massive wave of anxiety to wash over me. For my entire life, standing up to my parents had resulted in crushing guilt and days of emotional turmoil. They had programmed me to believe that setting a boundary was an act of profound selfishness. But as I navigated the familiar city streets, I realized the guilt was completely absent. They had crossed a line so severe, so undeniably criminal, that it had instantly severed the toxic emotional tether that had bound me to them for 33 years. They had actively chosen to sacrifice my financial future, my credit, and my safety to protect a son who was actively stealing from his own employer. They did not view me as a daughter. They viewed me as a disposable resource. That realization, while objectively tragic, was incredibly liberating. I turned on the radio, letting the soft sounds of a late-night jazz station fill the cabin of my car. My phone buzzed persistently in the center console. Glancing down, I saw my mother's name flashing repeatedly on the screen, followed quickly by incoming text messages from my father. They were likely a chaotic mixture of desperate pleading and authoritarian threats. I reached over and pressed the power button, plunging the device into total darkness. Their panic was no longer my problem to manage. I pulled into the secure underground parking garage of my apartment building. I gathered my purse and my heavy, matte black leather briefcase, making my way to the private elevator. My apartment was a sprawling, modern loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. It was a space I had purchased entirely with the quiet, massive profits from my cybersecurity firm. A space my family had never visited because they believed I lived in a tiny, rundown studio. I walked inside, dropped my keys on the granite kitchen island, and walked straight to my home office. The room was bathed in the soft blue light of my multi-monitor workstation. This was the true nerve center of Apex Sentinel Solutions. I placed my briefcase on the large glass desk, unzipped the compartment, and extracted my heavily encrypted custom laptop. I connected it to the secure docking station, engaging the biometric locks. My thumbprint and facial scan verified instantly, granting me full administrative access to my global command dashboard. I immediately pulled up the dedicated monitoring channel for Meridian Financial Partners. The situation had escalated dramatically since I had checked it in the steakhouse parking lot. The warning indicators were no longer just flashing yellow. A cascading series of critical red alerts was rapidly spreading across their entire internal compliance network. Without my silent background patches actively masking their massive data vulnerabilities, their legacy system was literally bleeding secure information. Spencer had effectively dismantled his own corporate fortress, and he lacked the technical vocabulary to even understand the alarms going off in his server room. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, watching the beautiful, chaotic digital destruction unfold on my monitors. The chief executive officer of Meridian was likely screaming at his technical team right now, demanding to know why the $50 million acquisition of my anonymous company had not been expedited. The sheer irony of the situation brought a genuine, relaxed smile to my face. But I had one very specific piece of personal business to attend to before I handled the corporate meltdown. I opened a highly secure direct portal to the three major national credit bureaus. The interface required a secondary level of biometric authentication, which I provided with a firm press of my thumb. The screen loaded my personal financial profile. There, glaringly obvious in the recent activity log, was the $300,000 commercial business loan my parents had fraudulently secured under my Social Security number. It was currently sitting in a pending transfer state, floating in the institutional ether before officially settling into their legacy joint account on Monday morning. I slowly and deliberately moved my wireless computer mouse to the extreme top right corner of the glowing command screen. I firmly clicked the bold flashing red button, clearly labeled Initiate Total Credit Freeze. A bright yellow warning prompt appeared on the center of my screen, formally asking me to confirm the critical action, noting clearly that this would instantly halt and recall any pending financial transactions currently attached to my verified identity. I did not hesitate for a single passing second. I clicked confirm. The advanced system processed the encrypted command instantly. A solid green confirmation banner flashed brilliantly across my screen. The total credit freeze was fully active. The National Bank would automatically red flag the $300,000 loan, recall the pending wire transfer, and immediately freeze my parents' legacy joint account, pending a massive federal fraud investigation. I closed the portal, feeling a profound sense of absolute power surging through my veins. My parents truly thought they could steal my identity and walk away completely consequence-free. Spencer thought he could fire me and easily retain his stolen corporate glory without any repercussions. They had all severely underestimated me for the very last time. I reached over to my polished desk lamp and clicked it off, plunging the quiet office into deep shadows, illuminated only by the erratic blinking glow of the failing Meridian servers. The inescapable trap was flawlessly set. The digital lock was permanently turned, and the absolute financial ruin of my arrogant golden child brother was now officially in motion. The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my loft, casting long geometric shadows across the polished hardwood. I woke up feeling entirely rested, completely unburdened by the heavy guilt that usually followed any disagreement with my family. I made a cup of dark roast coffee, taking my time to enjoy the quiet stillness of my home. My personal cell phone remained powered off, sitting exactly where I had left it on the kitchen island the night before. I had absolutely no desire to check the barrage of panicked voicemails and desperate text messages that my parents and Spencer had undoubtedly sent during the early morning hours. Their manufactured crisis was no longer my responsibility to manage. I dressed with deliberate care, selecting a sharply tailored charcoal suit and a pair of pristine black leather heels. Today was not a day for blending into the background. Today was a day for embracing the absolute authority I had quietly built over the past 4 years. I grabbed my encrypted laptop, slid it into my briefcase, and headed down to the parking garage. The drive into the downtown technology district was smooth, the morning traffic parting easily as I navigated toward the soaring glass and steel structure that housed the physical headquarters of Apex Sentinel Solutions. I pulled into the private subterranean parking facility reserved exclusively for executive staff. A uniformed security guard recognized my vehicle immediately, offering a polite nod as he raised the heavy reinforced barrier. I parked in my designated spot and took the private elevator directly up to the top floor. The doors slid open with a soft, melodic chime, revealing the expansive, breathtakingly modern lobby of my company. The space was a masterclass in sleek, high-tech, minimalist design. Brilliant white walls curved seamlessly into sound-dampening acoustic ceilings, illuminated by recessed lighting that mimicked natural daylight. Beyond the frosted glass partitions, dozens of brilliant software engineers, data scientists, and compliance architects were already hard at work at their specialized, multi-monitor workstations. The atmosphere was charged with a quiet, focused, and incredibly intense energy. This was not the toxic, arrogant environment of Meridian Financial Partners. This was a sanctuary of genuine competence and elite innovation, and I was its sole creator. As I walked down the central corridor toward my corner office, several team members offered warm professional greetings. They did not know me as Nina, the disposable risk analyst, or Nina, the disappointing sister. They knew me as the founder, the visionary chief executive officer who had revolutionized corporate cybersecurity. I nodded in return, feeling a deep, profound sense of pride settle in my chest. I opened the heavy glass door to my private office and walked over to my expansive desk, setting my briefcase down. Before I could even open my laptop to connect it to the master docking station, a soft knock sounded at my open door. Marcus, my incredibly sharp chief technology officer, stepped into the room, holding a sleek digital tablet. He was a brilliant former federal cybersecurity director whom I had personally recruited 2 years ago. "Good morning," he said, his expression a mixture of professional focus and mild amusement. "I see you finally severed your physical ties with the dinosaurs over at Meridian Financial Partners." I smiled genuinely, gesturing for him to take a seat in one of the plush chairs opposite my desk. "I did," I confirmed smoothly. "Human Resources officially deactivated my employee profile yesterday morning. I assume you have been monitoring the resulting fallout on their network architecture?" Marcus let out a short, disbelieving laugh as he tapped the screen of his tablet and slid it across the glass desk toward me. "Fallout is a very mild word for what is currently happening over there," he stated, leaning back in his chair. "It is an absolute, unmitigated digital bloodbath. As soon as your administrative credentials were deleted, your automated silent background patches instantly stopped deploying across their servers." I looked down at the tablet. The screen displayed a complex real-time diagnostic map of Meridian's internal compliance infrastructure. The entire grid was flashing with aggressive red warning indicators. "They are running on their native legacy systems now," Marcus explained, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "It is honestly terrifying how completely incompetent their risk management department actually is. Without your daily, invisible interventions, their international wealth transfer protocols have completely unraveled. They are currently hemorrhaging secure client data. They are violating at least a dozen major federal masking regulations every single hour. Their internal alarms must be deafening right now." I stared at the red indicators, feeling a deep, satisfying validation. For 6 years, Spencer had strutted around that office, taking full credit for the flawless compliance audits, blindly assuming his department's success was due to his brilliant leadership. He never bothered to actually understand the software. He never realized that I had been quietly, desperately patching his catastrophic structural vulnerabilities from my cubicle every single day just to keep the firm from being indicted. He thought I was just a low-level subordinate he could easily replace with a drinking buddy. "What is their current exposure level?" I asked, keeping my voice purely analytical. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "If they do not integrate a massive systemic override by the end of the business week, they will automatically fail the preliminary review by the Securities and Exchange Commission on Thursday morning. The federal fines alone will absolutely bankrupt the firm, and their senior vice presidents will be looking at severe criminal negligence charges. They are completely out of time, and they have absolutely no internal talent capable of fixing a structural collapse of this magnitude." I nodded slowly, absorbing the funds. "Thank you for the update," I said. "Continue monitoring their server degradation, but do not initiate any external stabilizing protocols. Let their system fail naturally." Marcus smiled, retrieving his tablet. "Understood. We will let gravity do the work." As he exited my office, closing the glass door behind him, I turned my attention back to my workstation. I docked my laptop, allowing my personal interface to merge with the towering monitors on my desk. While the corporate destruction of Meridian Financial Partners was unfolding perfectly, I needed to verify the status of the personal financial sabotage my family had attempted the night before. I opened my highly secure banking portal, running the secondary biometric authentication scan to access my frozen credit profile. The total credit freeze I had initiated late last night had officially hit the major institutional banking networks at the exact start of business hours this morning. I navigated to the detailed transaction history and watched as the automated institutional response updated in real time. The $300,000 commercial business loan, which my parents had fraudulently secured using my Social Security number, had been forcibly aborted. Because the funds were still in a pending wire transfer state, the sudden lockdown of my credit profile triggered an immediate aggressive reversal protocol. A green notification banner populated across the top of my screen. "Wire transfer recalled. Funds reversed to originating lender. Fraud investigation initiated." I let out a slow, steady breath. The money had never officially settled into my parents' legacy joint account. The massive influx of cash they were desperately depending on to cover Spencer's hidden embezzlement was gone, vaporized by a single click of my mouse. But the institutional response did not stop there. The banking system recognized the severe discrepancy between the frozen credit profile and the unauthorized loan origination. I watched the live portal as the system automatically generated a series of aggressive, punitive actions against the primary co-signers of the destination account, Richard and Patricia. The lender posted a formal status update to the disputed transaction. "Joint account frozen, pending review. Asset verification required from all signers. Unauthorized loan origination flagged for suspected identity theft." The financial death spiral was now completely, irrevocably locked in. My parents had wagered their entire pristine suburban existence on the absolute certainty that I would remain docile and submissive. They bet their house, and they ultimately lost. Everything was now perfectly balanced. The trap was flawlessly closed. By Wednesday afternoon, the collapse at Meridian had moved beyond internal warning lights. It had become visible to clients. Marcus returned to my office shortly after noon with a second diagnostic report. This one included a live feed of institutional exit requests, vendor suspensions, and regulatory notifications automatically generated by Meridian's own systems. The numbers were no longer abstract. A pension fund had paused all new transfers. 2 private foundations had demanded written assurances that their beneficiary data remained protected. A multinational client had begun moving nearly $800 million to a competing firm. "Their executive team has entered containment mode," Marcus said. "They are restricting internal communications and trying to blame the failures on a vendor outage. It will not hold. Their own logs show the vulnerabilities originated inside the risk division." I scanned the report. "Has anyone attempted to alter the logs?" "Yes. Someone with vice presidential credentials tried to delete 2 audit trails at 11:16 this morning. The system rejected the request and preserved the attempt." Spencer. He had spent his entire career surviving by erasing context and rewriting blame. Now the architecture itself was refusing to cooperate. I instructed Marcus to preserve only the records Apex was contractually entitled to retain, and to send a legal hold notice to Evelyn. I would not give Spencer an opportunity to claim that we had manipulated Meridian's data. Every step had to be clean documented and defensible. At 12:37, an email arrived from Meridian's chief executive officer. The subject line read, "Final Acquisition Authority." The message doubled the urgency of the previous offer and requested a direct call with Apex leadership. Evelyn joined me through a secure conference line while the CEO spoke to the anonymous corporate identity he believed represented my company. His voice carried the brittle control of a man trying not to panic in front of his board. "We are prepared to move immediately," he said. "Our directors have authorized accelerated due diligence. We can place a substantial portion of the purchase price in escrow today." Evelyn answered on behalf of Apex. "Your request is under review. We will not waive ethical, regulatory, or technical diligence merely because Meridian failed to maintain its own infrastructure." A pause followed. In the background, I heard another voice speaking sharply, then the CEO muted his line. When he returned, the controlled tone had disappeared. "Our Vice President of Risk Management has assured us he can facilitate the integration," he said. "Spencer has been assigned direct responsibility for obtaining this agreement." I muted my microphone and looked at Evelyn. She raised one eyebrow. The trap was forming without any pressure from us. "We will communicate through the designated acquisition channel," she told him. "Do not contact Apex personnel outside that process." The call ended. Less than 6 minutes later, the first email from Spencer reached the anonymous CEO inbox. "Dear Founder," he wrote, "I have been authorized to finalize Meridian's acquisition of Apex Sentinel. I understand your firm values discretion. I can personally guarantee preferred placement across our entire vendor network if we conclude the transaction before tomorrow morning." The message was arrogant, but still within the language of aggressive negotiation. I archived it and continued working. At 1:15, he sent another. "We can waive several internal controls to speed funding. The board does not need visibility into every incentive. There are ways to make this exceptionally profitable for both of us." At 2 o'clock, Meridian lost another major client. At 2:12, Spencer's third message arrived. "I can authorize a private consulting payment outside the acquisition price. It would be routed through an approved intermediary and would not appear in the board package. Name a number." Evelyn came into my office carrying a printed copy. "He has crossed from desperation into a written offer of an undisclosed personal benefit," she said. "Do not answer him directly." I was not planning to. She placed the page on my desk. "His language is careful enough that he may later call it a consulting arrangement. We need him to clarify who receives the payment, where it comes from, and what he expects in return." We drafted a neutral legal response from Apex's transaction desk, asking him to identify the proposed intermediary, the source of funds, and the approvals supporting the payment. We did not encourage misconduct. We simply required him to explain the offer he had already made. Spencer answered in 23 minutes. "Use the Harrow Strategic account," he wrote. "It is controlled through a Cayman services company and does not require standard Meridian procurement review. Once Apex stabilizes our system, I can guarantee your firm exclusive access to future compliance contracts. The board can be informed after execution." I read the message twice. Harrow Strategic was one of the entities that had appeared in the background of Spencer's offshore gambling problems 3 years earlier. What he described was not a legitimate consulting fee. It was an off-the-books payment routed through a shell company in exchange for a corporate contract. Evelyn's expression hardened. "This goes into the evidence file. Preserve the complete headers and server timestamps," I said, "and notify outside counsel that the account name may connect to his personal financial activity." The next email revealed even more. Spencer promised that if Apex signed before the SEC review, he would classify the payment as an emergency technology expense and move it through a reserve account he controlled. He also offered to provide internal client data to help Apex identify future sales targets. In a single paragraph, he proposed misuse of corporate funds concealment from his board and unauthorized disclosure of confidential client information. He had spent years telling our parents that I lacked business instincts. Yet, under pressure, his idea of leadership was to sell access to the company he was supposed to protect. At 3:15, Evelyn received a call from a Meridian Board liaison who had worked with her on a previous regulatory matter. The liaison did not disclose privileged board discussions, but the authorized summary was enough. The CEO had given Spencer until the board convened at 10 o'clock Thursday morning to present an executable Apex agreement. If he failed, he would be terminated for cause, and the company would refer the failed audit controls to regulators with his name attached. The ultimatum explained the speed of his unraveling. He was not trying to save Meridian. He was trying to purchase one more layer of protection before the board examined his department. My personal phone, which I had turned on only to document incoming messages, began to vibrate across the desk. First Patricia, then Richard, then Spencer. None of them left a calm message. Patricia accused me of destroying the family over paperwork. Richard ordered me to reverse the credit freeze before the bank contacted their attorney. Spencer sent only 6 words. "Fix this now. You owe me." I saved each message and forwarded copies to Evelyn. The bank reversal must have reached them. "It did," she said. "The originating lender froze the legacy account and requested verification from every signer. Your parents cannot move the recalled funds, and their other linked credit lines are under review." I expected satisfaction. What I felt instead was clarity. The financial system had not punished them because I was vindictive. It had responded because they had used my identity without permission. Consequences were not cruelty simply because the people facing them were related to me. At 4:40, the head of security from my residential building called. His voice was controlled but urgent. "Miss Nina, your parents are in the lobby. They told the front desk there was a medical emergency and followed another resident through the secured entrance before staff could stop them. They are refusing to leave." I looked at Evelyn. She had heard the call through the speaker. "Do not send them upstairs," I told security. "Keep them in the public lobby and have 2 officers present. I am on my way." Evelyn gathered the cease and desist package she had prepared that morning. "They are going to demand money." I stood and buttoned my jacket. "Then they are finally going to hear no in a room where they cannot pretend they misunderstood it." The lobby of my building had always felt calm. Pale stone floors, warm recessed lighting, a wall of glass overlooking the river, and a reception desk designed to make every arrival feel controlled. That evening, the calm had been split open by my mother's voice. "She lives here because we paid for her education," Patricia shouted as the elevator doors opened. "You cannot keep parents away from their own daughter." 2 building security officers stood between my parents and the private elevators. Richard paced beside a low leather sofa, his coat unbuttoned and his face dark with anger. Patricia clutched a stack of bank notices in one hand. The moment she saw me, she pushed toward the security line. "There she is. Nina, tell these people to stop treating us like criminals." I walked across the lobby with Evelyn beside me. "You entered a secured building under a false claim of a medical emergency. They are treating you like people who violated the building's rules." Richard stopped pacing. "Enough with the performance. You froze the account." "I froze my credit," I corrected. "The bank froze the account after detecting a loan created with my identity." Patricia thrust the notices toward me. "Do you understand what you have done? The bank recalled the transfer. They locked the joint account and suspended our home equity line. Spencer needs that money by tomorrow morning." Her use of the word needs was almost breathtaking. Not stole, not forged, not embezzled. Spencer needed, therefore everyone else was required to surrender. "That money was never his," I said. "It was a fraudulent loan attached to my social security number." Richard stepped closer until one of the officers lifted a hand. "We were going to repay it. Your mother and I signed as co-borrowers. You were only the guarantor." "A guarantor who never applied, never consented, and never signed." "Do not lecture me about signatures," he snapped. "We had copies of your records because we raised you. We used information already available to the family." Evelyn moved half a step forward. "Using stored personal information to obtain credit without authorization is identity theft. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, you should stop making admissions in a lobby with security cameras." Patricia stared at Evelyn as though she had just noticed her. "Who are you?" "My chief legal officer," I said. The answer unsettled them. They had come prepared to confront an isolated, recently fired daughter. They had not expected council security or a building they could not dominate. Patricia's anger collapsed into tears with remarkable speed. She dropped onto the sofa and pressed both hands to her face. "Your brother is going to prison," she sobbed. "Is that what you want? He made mistakes because he was under pressure. The company expected too much from him, and now you are using one bad decision to destroy his entire life." One bad decision did not create $300,000 of missing money. Richard looked around the lobby, aware that the receptionist and both officers could hear him. He lowered his voice. "We do not have time to debate the past. Reverse the freeze tonight. If the bank releases the funds, Spencer can replace the money before the review. Once the audit is over, we will refinance the house and remove your name." "No." The single word stopped him. He blinked. "What did you say?" "No. I will not reverse the freeze. I will not authorize the loan. I will not help Spencer conceal money from Meridian or federal regulators." Patricia stood again, tears still shining on her cheeks. "Then use your retirement account. You have worked for years. You must have at least several $100,000 in your 401k. Take a hardship withdrawal or borrow against it. We only need enough to get Spencer through the audit." For a moment, even Richard looked surprised by the demand. Then he nodded, as if she had proposed the obvious solution. "Your mother is right," he said. "You can rebuild retirement savings. Spencer cannot rebuild his reputation after a federal referral." There it was, the family equation in its purest form. My future was replaceable. His image was sacred. You want me to drain my retirement account to replace money he embezzled after you already stole my identity? Patricia reached for my wrist. A security officer stepped between us before she made contact. "Do not twist this," she cried. "We gave you life. We paid for braces, school clothes, and college applications. Families sacrifice for each other. You owe your brother this." I covered his gambling debt once by keeping it secret. I corrected his work for years. I protected Mom and Dad from knowing how often he lied. Every sacrifice you demanded from me became permission for him to take more. That ends tonight. Richard's face tightened. You are acting powerful because you think your little technology company makes you better than us. The comment confirmed that Spencer had told them enough to explain why Meridian wanted Apex, but not enough to admit that I owned it. They still imagined I was a minor consultant with access to someone important. "This is not about being better," I said. "It is about refusing to participate in a crime." Evelyn opened her leather folder and removed 3 envelopes. She handed one to Richard, one to Patricia, and placed the third on the reception desk for formal record. "These are cease and desist notices," she said. "They direct you to stop entering Ms. Nina's residence or workplace without written permission. Stop contacting her through third parties. Preserve all records relating to the loan application and refrain from using any of her identifying information. The notices also advise you that further attempts to access her accounts will be reported immediately." Richard tore open his envelope and scanned the first page. "You had this prepared before we arrived." "I expected you to ignore my boundary," I said. "You have been doing it my entire life." Patricia's expression changed again. The tears disappeared, replaced by naked resentment. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us. You hide money, hide where you live, hide your business, and then humiliate us in front of strangers. Spencer was right. You have always wanted the family to fail so you could feel superior. I studied her face and realized there was no sequence of facts that would make her see me as the injured person. She could watch Spencer steal from his employer, watch Richard forge my consent, and still construct a world in which my refusal was the betrayal. Their love was not merely conditional, it was transactional, and I had been assigned the role of emergency collateral. You did not come here to apologize, I said. You came because the asset you planned to use said no. Patricia flinched as if I had struck her. Richard crushed the notice in his fist. If Spencer loses his job, do not expect to be welcome in our family again. I almost smiled. The threat had controlled me for years because I believed belonging was something they could grant or remove. Standing in that lobby, I finally understood that they had never offered belonging. They had offered service in exchange for temporary tolerance. You already removed me, I said. You did it when you used my identity without asking. I turned to the head of security. Please escort them out. Their names are no longer authorized for visitor access. Patricia began calling my name first with anger and then with pleading. Richard demanded that the officers take their hands off him, even though no one had touched him. Evelyn and I walked toward the private elevator. As the doors opened, I glanced back once. My parents stood beneath the lobby lights, holding legal notices they could no longer pretend not to understand. They looked less like authority figures than frightened people facing the first boundary they had not been able to break. The doors closed between us. As the elevator carried me upward, I waited for grief to arrive. Instead, a profound stillness settled over me. They would never see me as a daughter whose safety mattered. To them, I was collateral damage for Spencer's success. Accepting that truth did not break my heart. It released me from the obligation to keep offering it to them. When the elevator opened into my loft, the city was dark beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago's lights stretched along the river in clean gold lines, while storm clouds gathered over the lake. Evelyn followed me into the home office and set her case beside the glass desk. Neither of us spoke until the security application confirmed that my parents had left the property. They are gone, she said. The building has preserved the lobby footage and the false medical emergency statement they gave the concierge. I removed my coat and looked at the Meridian dashboard. The company's network had deteriorated further during the confrontation downstairs. 2 more institutional clients had suspended activity. An automated federal reporting threshold had been triggered at 7:46. Meridian could no longer keep the problem inside its own walls. Then we finish this tonight, I said. Evelyn opened the evidence repository on the center monitor. Spencer's emails appeared in chronological order, complete with routing headers, timestamps, server verification, and the attached details for Harrow Strategic. We reviewed each message carefully. The goal was not to create the most dramatic presentation, it was to build a sequence no one in the boardroom could dismiss as a misunderstanding. First, the termination record showing that Monica had removed me for operating a secondary business. Second, the vendor and access documents proving that my authorized administration had stopped when Meridian revoked my credentials. Third, the diagnostic record showing the natural degradation of systems Spencer claimed to manage. Fourth, his written offers of concealed payments, preferential contracts, misuse of a reserve account, and unauthorized client data. We should separate the employment issue from the criminal referrals, Evelyn said. The board may try to argue that the termination was a routine human resources decision. Then we show motive. Spencer needed my salary line for his fraternity brother, and he needed my removal to blame the failed controls on me. Do you have documentation? I pulled up 3 internal messages Spencer had sent before my dismissal. In one, he asked finance to reserve the budget associated with my position for a new hire named Grant Mercer. In another, he told Monica that eliminating a conflicted analyst would demonstrate decisive leadership before the board review. The third instructed her not to interview me about the encrypted traffic because he had already decided termination was appropriate. Evelyn read them in silence. That gives us pretext and coordination. Add them after the termination agreement. She did. Then she drafted a preservation letter to Meridian's board, directing the company to retain all messages, access logs, hiring communications, and financial records connected to Spencer Monica Harrow Strategic and the fraudulent loan. The letter made clear that Apex would cooperate with lawful regulatory requests, but would not deploy any stabilizing software while Meridian's ethical and security failures remained unresolved. At 8:30, the CEO sent another acquisition request. This one no longer mentioned $50 million. It authorized Evelyn to propose any commercially reasonable number and promised immediate board approval. I read it without satisfaction. Money had never been the issue. Selling Apex to Meridian would place my work under the control of the same executives who rewarded Spencer's performance without verifying it, and allowed Monica to terminate an employee on evidence she did not understand. "We are not selling," I said. I assumed as much. "And we are not granting an emergency license. If we rescue them before the review, the board will call the collapse a temporary technical incident. Spencer will claim he negotiated the solution. Monica will say the firing was unrelated. They will survive by converting my work into their defense." Evelyn nodded. "Then the meeting is not an acquisition negotiation. It is a formal denial and an evidence presentation." "Correct. But they need to believe the acquisition remains possible until everyone responsible is in the room." We composed the response together. The executive leadership of Apex Sentinel Solutions acknowledges Meridian Financial Partners' urgent requests concerning the proposed acquisition and the present failure of Meridian's compliance infrastructure. The founder and chief executive officer of Apex Sentinel will meet with Meridian's board of directors at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning in Meridian's principal executive boardroom. The board's chief executive officer, chief financial officer, general counsel, human resources director Monica, and vice president of risk management Spencer must attend. No delegates or substitutes will be accepted. Evelyn looked at me. "Do you want to state that the meeting occurs without a commitment to transact? Put it in the legal footer. They will see what they want to see in the main paragraph." She added the limitation attached to the evidence preservation notice and prepared the message for delivery. Before she pressed send, I stopped her. "Copy the full board, not only the CEO. Spencer has survived by controlling who receives information. Tomorrow, he does not get to filter the room." Evelyn entered every director's verified address. "Ready. Send it." The delivery confirmations began appearing almost immediately. One by one, board members opened the message. The CEO responded within 4 minutes, accepting every condition. Monica acknowledged attendance 2 minutes later. Spencer did not respond for nearly half an hour. When he finally did, his message contained only one sentence: "I will be present to complete the acquisition." He still believed he was walking into the room as Meridian's savior. At 9:20, Evelyn placed a call to the SEC enforcement contact assigned to Meridian's preliminary review. She did not make accusations beyond the evidence. She reported that Apex had received communications appearing to offer undisclosed payments and misuse of confidential information, and that the original electronic records were available through counsel. The enforcement attorney requested preservation of the material and confirmed that a regulatory team would be at Meridian the following morning. Possible criminal conduct, she explained, would be referred through the appropriate federal channels. Everything was now outside Spencer's control. He could not delete the emails, pressure me through our parents, or transform the acquisition into a private bargain. Evelyn closed the evidence file. "The meeting is exactly 48 hours after Monica terminated you." I looked at the clock. 10 minutes past 10 on Wednesday night. In less than 12 hours, I would walk back into the building where I had spent 6 years, making myself invisible. He told the board he secured the deal, I said. He will spend the night rehearsing how he saved them. And Monica? She will assume I am evidence of a personnel problem that needs to be removed before the CEO arrives. Neither of them can imagine that the person they dismissed and the founder they fear are the same woman. We selected the final presentation order and printed 3 sealed copies for the board, outside counsel, and regulators. I instructed Apex's technical team to continue passive monitoring only within our contractual rights, and not to touch Meridian systems. If the network failed, it would fail because Meridian had neglected it, not because I had sabotaged it. After Evelyn left, I stood alone in front of the windows. My reflection floated over the skyline, no employee badge, no cardboard box, no family tribunal. I thought about the sentence I had spoken in Monica's office. I really should focus on just one job. They had heard surrender. What I had meant was freedom. I closed the laptop and set out the charcoal designer suit I would wear in the morning. At 10 o'clock Thursday, the Meridian board would expect an anonymous technology executive to enter its boardroom and rescue them. Instead, the doors would open and Spencer would finally meet the woman whose work, company, and loyalty he had mistaken for resources he owned. The atmosphere inside the glass-walled executive boardroom was absolutely suffocating. Despite the advanced climate control system, the tension radiating from the men and women seated around the massive mahogany table made the room feel like a furnace. At the head of the table sat the chief executive officer, a man who usually projected an aura of untouchable authority. Today, his perfectly tailored suit jacket was draped carelessly over the back of his ergonomic chair, and his silk tie was loosened. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a linen handkerchief, while glaring at the towering digital displays. Those screens, which normally showcased climbing profit margins and flawless compliance audits, were currently awash in a terrifying sea of flashing red warnings. The company was in a complete digital freefall. Institutional clients were pulling their massive portfolios by the minute, terrified by the sudden catastrophic vulnerabilities in the firm's data masking protocols. Sitting midway down the table was Monica, the human resources director, who had so smugly handed me my termination papers just days prior. She looked physically ill, her complexion a pale, chalky gray, as she nervously twisted an expensive fountain pen between her trembling fingers. She knew, just as the rest of the board knew, that heads were going to roll for this unmitigated disaster. And then there was Spencer. My older brother sat near the CEO, leaning back in his plush leather chair with an air of unearned, arrogant confidence. While the rest of the executive committee looked as though they were attending a funeral, Spencer wore a smug, self-satisfied smile. He adjusted his expensive cuffs and leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the polished wood surface to command the room's attention. "You all need to relax," Spencer announced, his voice projecting a manufactured calm that grated against the panic in the room. "I have the situation completely under control." The CEO stopped dabbing his forehead and shot my brother a look of pure venom. "Under control," the CEO spat, his voice rising. "We are hemorrhaging clients, Spencer. The federal reviewers are threatening to freeze our operational licenses by the end of the week, and our risk management department is paralyzed." "How exactly is this under control?" Spencer chuckled, a condescending sound that echoed loudly in the tense boardroom. "Because," he stated smoothly, "I have spent the last 24 hours negotiating a total acquisition with Apex Sentinel Solutions." The board members exchanged desperate, hopeful glances. Apex Sentinel was the golden ticket, the elite cybersecurity firm that everyone in the industry knew possessed the only proprietary software capable of instantly stabilizing a collapse of this magnitude. They agreed to expedite the timeline. Spencer continued puffing out his chest and basking in the sudden, desperate admiration of his peers. "I secured the deal late last night. Their chief executive officer is coming here personally this morning to finalize the paperwork and deploy their immediate stabilization protocols. I promised them a few off-the-books vendor incentives to push it through, but the ink is practically dry. I single-handedly saved this firm. Monica let out a long, shaky breath of relief, her posture relaxing slightly. The CEO leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "If you actually pulled this off, Spencer," he said, his tone shifting from fury to cautious gratitude, "you will have secured your place at this table permanently. We owe you a massive debt of gratitude." Spencer smiled, soaking in the praise he believed he so deeply deserved. He had no idea that his supposed rescue mission was actually the final lock clicking into place on a trap he had built for himself. Down in the marble lobby of the Meridian building, I stepped through the glass doors and inhaled the crisp air. I was flanked on my right by Evelyn, my chief legal officer, and on my left by David, a senior corporate litigator whose reputation was legendary. I wore a flawless designer suit that projected absolute, uncompromising authority. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor, a steady, deliberate drumbeat of approaching consequence. The security guards at the front desk, who used to barely acknowledge my existence when I swiped my standard employee badge, immediately stood up straight as we approached. I did not stop at the visitor log. Evelyn simply flashed a platinum credential card that granted us unrestricted executive access, and we moved smoothly past the barriers toward the private elevators. As the polished steel doors slid shut and the elevator began its rapid ascent to the top floor, Evelyn looked over at me with a sharp, anticipatory smile. "They are completely desperate," she murmured, holding a sleek leather briefcase securely at her side. "Our internal monitors show their system degradation reached critical mass 10 minutes ago. They are waiting for their savior." I kept my eyes locked on the digital floor indicator as the numbers climbed higher and higher. "They are about to get exactly what they asked for," I replied, my voice level and devoid of any lingering emotion. I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me. For years I had walked these halls with my head down, making myself small, quietly fixing the catastrophic errors of arrogant men who actively despised me. Today I was returning not as a subordinate, but as the executioner. The elevator chimed as it reached the executive level. The doors slid open to reveal the quiet corridor leading directly to the main boardroom. We walked down the hallway with synchronized steps. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see the executive committee gathered around the table. I saw the CEO looking expectantly toward the entrance. I saw Monica nervously checking her watch. And I saw Spencer leaning back in his chair, holding a cup of coffee and looking like a king awaiting his coronation. I did not knock. I reached out and firmly pushed the heavy oak doors open. The heavy wood swung inward with a solid thud that instantly drew every single pair of eyes in the room. The entire boardroom completely froze. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was absolute pin-drop silence. The executives stared at me in sheer, uncomprehending shock. They were expecting a mysterious, anonymous tech billionaire to walk through those doors and offer them salvation. Instead, they were looking at the mid-level risk analyst they had publicly terminated just days ago. Monica actually dropped her fountain pen. It clattered loudly against the mahogany table, breaking the spell of silence. Spencer was the first to react. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a deep, purple flush of rage that crawled rapidly up his neck and across his face. He slammed his coffee cup down, spilling dark liquid across the polished wood, and leaped out of his chair. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, his voice cracking with fury as he pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "How did you get past security?" He turned wildly toward the door, practically spitting his words. "Security? Get this disgruntled ex-employee out of here immediately. She has no right to be in this building." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply stood at the head of the table, projecting an aura of total, unbreakable control, and let him finish his pathetic tantrum. Evelyn stepped smoothly past me, ignoring Spencer completely. She walked directly to the center of the mahogany table, placed her leather briefcase down, and snapped the brass locks open with a sharp click. The sound echoed in the tense room. She extracted a stack of acquisition contracts and laid them perfectly flat on the table right in front of the stunned chief executive officer. "Gentlemen," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through Spencer's panicked shouting with cold authority. She gestured toward me, her sharp eyes locking onto my brother's purple, terrified face. "I would like to introduce the sole founder and chief executive officer of Apex Sentinel Solutions, Nina." The blood drained from Spencer's face, leaving him a sickly, ghostly white. His knees buckled slightly and he collapsed back into his chair as the crushing reality of his total destruction finally settled into his arrogant mind. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that follows a catastrophic car crash, where everyone involved is simply waiting for the dust to settle before they dare to assess the damage. Spencer sat frozen in his leather chair. His mouth hung slightly open, opening and closing soundlessly as he stared at me. The smug, victorious aura he had projected just moments ago had completely evaporated, replaced by a hollow, terrified realization. The chief executive officer looked rapidly between my attorneys, the acquisition contracts resting on the table, and me. He was clearly struggling to process the impossible information he had just been handed. He looked at Monica, hoping for some sort of rational explanation, but the human resources director was staring at her lap, her hands trembling violently. She looked as though she wanted the polished mahogany floor to open up and swallow her whole. I did not wait for an invitation. I walked purposefully toward the head of the massive table, the clicking of my heels echoing sharply in the silent room. The executive who had previously occupied the chair hastily stood up and stepped aside. I took my seat, smoothing my skirt with deliberate calm. Evelyn stood to my right, projecting cold legal authority, while David stood to my left, his arms crossed as he surveyed the sweating executives. I unclasped my leather briefcase, retrieved my encrypted laptop, and set it on the polished wood surface. I reached out and took the main presentation cable that ran directly into the boardroom's smart screen system. I plugged it into my device. Instantly, the massive digital displays that lined the far wall shifted from their chaotic, flashing red warning indicators to a crisp, pristine white background bearing the silver emblem of Apex Sentinel Solutions. I folded my hands on the table and looked directly at the chief executive officer. "You requested an expedited meeting to finalize your acquisition of my company," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the expansive room. "You believed you were purchasing a desperate lifeline to save your failing infrastructure. I am here today to clarify the reality of your situation." The chief executive officer cleared his throat, adjusting his collar as a large bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "Nina," he started, his tone a bizarre mixture of authoritative demand and desperate pleading. "If this is true, if you actually own Apex Sentinel, then we need to execute this merger immediately. Our compliance network is failing. We are bleeding institutional capital." I held up a single hand, silencing him instantly. "You will speak when I permit you to speak," I commanded. The chief executive officer snapped his mouth shut, his face flushing dark red. I tapped a single key on my laptop. The smart screen behind me displayed a high-resolution scan of the termination agreement Monica had handed me exactly 48 hours earlier. "Let us begin with the root cause of your current institutional collapse," I said smoothly. "Exactly 48 hours ago, your Human Resources Director, Monica, called me into her office. She informed me that I was being terminated for operating a secondary business on company time. She claimed it was a severe breach of corporate ethics. I shifted my gaze to Monica, who flinched physically under my attention. What Monica and your brilliant vice president of risk management failed to understand was that my secondary business was the very cybersecurity firm you are now desperately begging to acquire. I tapped another key. The screen transitioned to a complex digital flowchart detailing Meridian's internal compliance architecture. For the past 4 years, I continued, my voice measured and analytical, your entire risk management department has been a complete facade. It was an elaborate house of cards, propped up by a single, severely underpaid analyst. Your vice president, Spencer, does not possess even a fundamental understanding of basic regulatory software. He could not pass a standard security audit if his life depended on it. Spencer let out a choked, strangled noise, but he remained paralyzed in his seat. The other board members turned to look at him, their expressions shifting from panic to profound disgust. Every single day, I explained to the captivated room, I logged into my terminal and quietly deployed custom security patches to mask his catastrophic structural vulnerabilities. I manually overrode the failing legacy systems to ensure the firm remained compliant with federal masking regulations. I essentially did his entire job for him while he took long lunches, played golf with senior partners, and claimed full credit for flawless quarterly reviews. I kept this entire firm from being indicted, and in return, he orchestrated a fraudulent termination to free up salary budget for his incompetent fraternity brother. The chief executive officer turned his furious glare towards Spencer. You fired the only person keeping our systems online, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. You told me she was stealing office supplies. Spencer tried to speak, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. Nina, please, he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. You have to stop. I ignored his pathetic plea. I was not finished. I tapped my keyboard a third time. The screen shifted again, this time displaying a split-screen view. On one side was the internal server diagnostic, showing Meridian's current critical failure state. On the other side was an open window to the anonymous chief executive inbox for Apex Sentinel Solutions. When you fired me, you severed the only lifeline keeping your legacy servers operational, I stated coldly. You demanded I leave the building, so I took my proprietary background patches with me. The resulting digital bloodbath you have experienced over the last 48 hours is the natural consequence of your own staggering incompetence. But it gets much worse. I scrolled down the inbox on the screen, revealing dozens of emails marked with urgent priority flags. Yesterday afternoon, your chief executive officer issued Spencer a brutal ultimatum. He was ordered to secure the acquisition of Apex Sentinel by Friday or face immediate termination and an SEC referral. Faced with the total destruction of his unearned career, Spencer decided to reach out to my anonymous corporate inbox. The board members leaned forward, their faces pale and drawn. I clicked the top email in the chain, projecting the text in massive font across the smart screen for everyone to read. Spencer began by offering standard corporate incentives, I narrated, walking the executives through my brother's digital desperation. But as your systems continued to degrade, his messages became frantic. He believed he was negotiating with a corrupt tech billionaire who would look the other way for the right price. He had no idea he was putting his criminal intentions directly into writing and sending them to the sister he just discarded. I highlighted a specific paragraph in the projected email. In this message sent at 3 a.m, your vice president of risk management explicitly offers me illegal, off-the-books kickbacks to secure this deal. He guarantees preferential vendor treatment and promises to funnel unmonitored firm assets into offshore shell accounts to bypass federal reviewers. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Several executives began shouting at once. The chief executive officer slammed both of his hands onto the mahogany table, his face a mask of absolute horror. "Spencer, you offered unauthorized kickbacks from our institutional accounts," the chief executive officer bellowed. "You committed felony fraud in writing." Spencer slid out of his chair, dropping to his knees on the floor. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "Nina, I am sorry," he sobbed. "I will resign. Please, just delete the emails." I looked down at the man who tormented me my entire life. I felt nothing. The chief executive officer turned to me, pleading. "Nina," he said, "deploy the patch and fix our servers." I slowly closed my laptop. I declined. "I didn't come here to save you. I came here to formally deny your licensing request due to a severe breach of corporate ethics by your VP." I stood up. "Oh, and my counsel has preserved Spencer's emails for the SEC enforcement team and the federal investigators waiting in your lobby. Good luck." I walked out of the glass-walled boardroom and did not look back. As I stepped into the polished marble lobby, I passed SEC enforcement attorneys accompanied by federal investigators, presenting their credentials to the terrified receptionist. The Securities and Exchange Commission had arrived, right on schedule. By the time I reached the street and climbed into the back of my waiting car, the digital shockwaves were already rippling through the financial sector. The news of Meridian Financial Partners collapsing hit the industry wire less than an hour later. The headlines were brutal, unforgiving, and incredibly precise. They did not just mention a generalized system failure. They explicitly detailed the catastrophic mismanagement within the risk management division. Spencer's name, once synonymous with our parents' blind pride and unearned corporate advancement, was suddenly plastered across every major financial news outlet as the primary architect of the disaster. He was publicly terminated before the closing bell rang. Meridian tried to distance themselves from his toxic fallout, but the damage was already done. The industry is incredibly small when you reach that echelon of wealth management, and word travels faster than light. Spencer was completely and permanently blacklisted. Every single contact he had carefully cultivated over expensive golf games and lavish steak dinners completely vanished. He spent the weekend desperately calling his old fraternity brothers, former mentors, and industry allies, begging for a lifeline or even just a brief consulting gig to bridge the gap. Not a single person answered his calls. He had become entirely radioactive. But losing his career was only the beginning of his nightmare. The emails I had forwarded to the federal reviewers provided a crystal-clear roadmap of his intentions, laying out his explicit willingness to commit felony fraud. By Monday morning, Spencer was no longer just an unemployed executive looking for a job. He was a prime suspect in a massive federal investigation. The authorities began digging through every single account he had managed over the past 3 years. They uncovered a trail of corporate espionage, unauthorized data masking, and blatant embezzlement that he had clumsily tried to hide beneath the patches I used to silently deploy. He had been siphoning firm assets into hidden offshore shell accounts, foolishly believing he was smart enough to outwit federal regulators. Now he was facing multiple felony charges that exposed him to substantial federal prison time. His smug arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the crushing reality that he was going to lose everything he had stolen. While Spencer was drowning in the consequences of his own conduct, the financial fraud my parents had attempted produced a separate chain of consequences. The credit freeze I initiated on the night of the steakhouse dinner forced the lender to recall the unauthorized $300,000 business loan before the transfer settled. The bank then reviewed the application, the legacy joint account, and every document Richard and Patricia had submitted using my personal information. Investigators found a forged electronic authorization, outdated records taken from my childhood files, and statements falsely claiming that I had agreed to guarantee the debt. What my parents had described as a temporary family arrangement was now documented as suspected identity theft and lending fraud. Their linked accounts were restricted, while the lender traced the source of the application and reviewed whether other credit lines had been obtained through inaccurate representations. The recalled money never reached Spencer, leaving the hole in Meridian's accounts fully exposed when regulators examined his records. The consequences did not arrive as a magical instant foreclosure. They accumulated over the next several weeks. Richard and Patricia had already co-signed luxury vehicle leases, personal loans, and business credit used to support Spencer's manufactured success. Once the fraudulent application triggered a wider review, lenders reduced limits, suspended refinancing options, and demanded updated proof of assets. Legal fees for the identity theft investigation and Spencer's defense consumed the cash they had left. Their suburban estate was heavily leveraged, and without the recalled loan, there was no reserve to cover the obligations coming due. Under pressure from creditors, they listed the property before a formal foreclosure could begin. The house they had treated as proof of their superiority became the only asset large enough to keep them solvent, while the investigations continued. The social humiliation was entirely devastating for them. My mother, Patricia, had spent her entire adult life ruling her local country club committee with an iron fist, judging other families for their minor indiscretions, and loudly bragging about Spencer's brilliant trajectory. Now she could barely walk down the aisles of her local grocery store without feeling the burning weight of pitying stares and whispered conversations. Her former friends suddenly stopped returning her phone calls. The weekly invitations to charity galas and exclusive cocktail parties completely dried up. They were unceremoniously dropped from their country club roster after missing 2 consecutive membership payments. My father, Richard, who had always defined his worth by his address and the impressive numbers in his bank account, looked as though he had aged 20 years in a matter of weeks. The golden child they had worshipped had not just disappointed them, he had actively dragged them down into total financial ruin. They were forced to pack up 3 decades of accumulated luxury goods, expensive furniture, and carefully curated art pieces, selling most of it at embarrassing estate auctions just to appease the aggressive creditors. They had to move into a cramped 2-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, a place my mother would have previously refused to even drive past. The reality of their new existence was harsh and unrelenting. Gone were the weekly landscaping services, the expensive wine deliveries, and the catered holiday parties that had once defined their social calendar. Instead, Patricia spent her days frantically sorting through piles of legal documents and debt collection notices, her hands shaking as she tried to make sense of the financial apocalypse Spencer had unleashed upon them. She tried to maintain a facade of dignity, telling the few acquaintances who still spoke to her that they were simply downsizing to embrace a more minimalist lifestyle, but absolutely no one believed the pathetic lie. Richard took a humiliating entry-level administrative job just to keep the lights on and put food on the table, answering to managers who were half his age. His pride, once his most defining characteristic, was entirely shattered by the crushing daily grind of minimal-wage survival. As for Spencer, the golden child, was forced to move into the tiny second bedroom of their depressing rental apartment, while he awaited his criminal trial. Stripped of his tailored suits, his corporate titles, and his unearned authority, he was finally forced to confront the hollow reality of his own existence. He spent his days sitting on a cheap sofa, staring blankly at the peeling paint on the walls, completely paralyzed by the magnitude of his failure. There was no one left to blame, no sister to scapegoat, and no wealthy parents to miraculously bail him out. The protective bubble of favoritism that had shielded him from consequences his entire life had violently burst, leaving him entirely exposed to the brutal justice of the federal court system. I did not celebrate their misery, nor did I shed a single tear for their monumental losses. I simply watched the inevitable consequences of their actions unfold with absolute, peaceful detachment. The universe had finally corrected the balance, and I was now entirely and wonderfully free forever and always. 6 weeks later, the crisp Chicago wind whipped through the downtown financial district, carrying with it the unmistakable energy of a city transitioning from a grueling workday into the vibrant promise of Friday evening. I walked out of the towering glass and steel headquarters of Apex Sentinel Solutions, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished pavement. The building, once a symbol of an unreachable corporate echelon, was now the epicenter of my own empire. Evelyn and David had just left my penthouse office after finalizing 2 new client agreements and the evidence package requested by regulators, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, my mind was entirely clear. I adjusted the collar of my wool coat, ready to step into the waiting town car that idled at the curb. My driver, Daniel, stood by the rear door, with a respectful nod, prepared to whisk me away to a quiet weekend. But as I crossed the wide expanse of the plaza, 3 figures stepped out from the shadows of the adjacent parking structure, deliberately blocking my path to the vehicle. It was Spencer, Richard, and Patricia. The sight of them was jarring, a stark and pathetic contrast to the arrogant, untouchable family unit that had ambushed me in my own lobby just over a week ago. They looked hollowed out, stripped of the manufactured superiority that had defined them for decades. Richard wore a rumpled trench coat, his shoulders stooped, the imposing patriarch reduced to a desperate, tired old man. Patricia, who had spent her entire adult life meticulously curating her country club aesthetic, looked disheveled. Her hair was flat, her makeup smudged, and she was clutching her designer handbag like a flotation device. And then there was Spencer. The golden child was practically unrecognizable. He looked sickly pale, his eyes darting around with frantic, uncontained anxiety. The consequences of his federal indictment and complete blacklisting were written all over his unshaven face. They had clearly been waiting in the freezing cold for hours, hoping to catch me outside the impenetrable security perimeter of my building. I did not break my stride, nor did I alter my expression. I simply stopped a few feet away from them, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. Patricia was the first to break. She lunged forward, tears spilling over her mascara and tracking dark lines down her cheeks. She reached out as if to grab my arm, but the sheer coldness of my gaze made her stop short. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, a perfect portrait of manufactured victimhood. "Nina, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking loudly in the evening air. "We have been trying to reach you for days. You changed your number, and your security teams will not let us near your building. We are desperate." Richard stepped up beside her, trying to summon a shred of his former authority, but failing completely. "We need to talk," he stated, though his voice wavered pathetically. "The bank has frozen everything. The foreclosure on the house is moving faster than we anticipated. Spencer is facing massive legal fees for his defense, and we have absolutely nothing left to give him. You have to help us navigate this crisis." I looked at the 3 of them, feeling a profound, absolute emptiness. There was no anger left, no lingering resentment, no desire to scream or seek apologies. They were simply strangers who had made catastrophic choices. "I am not navigating anything for you," I replied, my tone flat and devoid of any emotional inflection. "Your financial mismanagement and Spencer's criminal behavior are not my responsibility." Spencer finally found his voice, stepping out from behind our parents like a frightened child hiding behind a shield. "Nina, they're going to put me in federal prison," he pleaded, his hands shaking violently. "I cannot survive in there. You own a massive cybersecurity firm now. You have connections. You have unlimited capital. You could hire the best defense team in the country and make these charges go away. I just need a second chance." Patricia began to wail openly, stepping closer and dropping all pretense of dignity. "We are family!" she cried out, her voice echoing off the concrete walls of the plaza. "You have millions of dollars. You have more money than you could ever spend in a single lifetime. You cannot leave your brother with absolutely nothing. He made a mistake, but he is still your flesh and blood. You have to save him." The sheer audacity of her demand was almost poetic. After decades of treating me like a disposable asset, after demanding I drain my own retirement to cover Spencer's debts after participating in my fraudulent termination, they still believed they were entitled to my salvation. I looked directly into Patricia's tear-filled eyes, feeling an unshakable calm settle deep within my bones. My detachment was absolute, a flawless armor, forged in the fires of their lifelong neglect. I turned my attention away from my sobbing mother and locked my gaze onto Spencer. He shrank back slightly under my scrutiny, the cowardice he had hidden for years finally exposed for the world to see. I took a slow, deliberate breath, savoring the crisp night air. I was fired for working 2 jobs, I stated clearly, my voice carrying the steady, unmistakable weight of absolute finality. "You taught me a valuable lesson about loyalty." I let the silence hang for a moment, ensuring every single syllable registered in their panicked minds. "I only have room for one priority now, and it isn't you." Spencer opened his mouth to beg again, but the words died in his throat. Richard looked down at the pavement, utterly defeated. Patricia let out a strangled gasp, burying her face in her hands. I did not stay to watch them mourn the loss of their meal ticket. I turned my back on them for the final time, stepping smoothly into the warm, leather-scented interior of the town car. Marcus closed the heavy door with a solid thud, severing me from their presence completely. "Drive, Daniel," I instructed softly. As the car pulled smoothly away from the curb and merged into the bustling city traffic, I looked in the rear-view mirror. Spencer, Richard, and Patricia stood huddled together on the freezing sidewalk, 3 small, insignificant figures rapidly shrinking into the distance until they disappeared entirely into the shadows of the city they once thought they owned. I leaned back into the plush seat, watching the brilliant city lights blur past the tinted windows, and for the first time in 33 years, I felt entirely and unconditionally free. The timeline shifted, the harsh winter of that confrontation melting away into the warmth of a new beginning. 1 year later, the sprawling grounds of my estate in the quiet snow-covered hills of upstate New York were illuminated by thousands of twinkling holiday lights. Inside the massive stone mansion, the air was wonderfully thick with the rich scent of roasted pine, burning firewood, and freshly mulled cinnamon cider. I stood at the head of a long, rustic dining table, surrounded by the people who truly mattered. Evelyn and David were there, laughing loudly and joyfully at a captivating story being told by my brilliant new Chief Technology Officer. Across the expansive room, my deeply loving partners, a kind and brilliant architect who had meticulously helped me design this very sanctuary, was pouring expensive wine for my most supportive industry mentors. The room vibrated with genuine warmth, profound respect, and an unconditional love that I had never experienced in my childhood home. There was no tension, no hidden agendas, and no golden children. We were simply a loyal, chosen family, bound tightly together by mutual admiration, encouragement, and beautifully shared triumphs. I raised my crystal glass, the firelight catching the deep red wine, and offered a silent, private toast to the journey that had brought me here. Over the past 12 months, I had learned the most important and liberating truth of all. The sweetest revenge is not found in anger or destruction. The sweetest revenge is thriving so loudly, so brightly, and so beautifully that the people who tried to silence you are completely forgotten.